Now, some of you have probably seen the recent announcements of something that Toriyama has been cooking, made in a CGI style similar to Dragon Ball Super Superhero. Now wait, don't click off the video, this time it actually looks really good. We could probably bet that not many of you knew beforehand about this particular series, Sandland, even though it is readily available on the Shonen Jump app and you can read it in a day. So we've decided to share some basic info about it because it is really worth reading. So, Sandland is more or less a post-apocalyptic story taking place on Earth in the far future, where natural disasters and worldwide conflict have destroyed pretty much most of the planet. Why does this sound actually really relevant? But this leaves only a wasteland called Sandland. That's why it's called that, because it's land and there's lots of sand on it. The peril of this particular story is that the massive river that has been the source of the water for pretty much the entire world has dried up, and this actually happened a while ago, and most of the supply of the precious liquid that remains is controlled by the king, who obviously uses this situation for profit. This admittedly does sound a lot like many sci-fi things, like Dune for example. He who controls the spice controls the world, this time it's water. This weathered world is inhabited by two main groups, humans and demons. Doesn't really sound that groundbreaking right now, but it's Toriyama. He does work his magic. Yes, of course, that sounds pretty straightforward, but honestly, for a one-volume story, you really don't need to go into semantics and make massive world building. You just want to get your message across. And although generally peaceful between each other, they are still distrustful of one another. But come on, they need to kind of work together sometimes because, you know, they need to survive and exist. Also, those who can't afford the precious water steal it from others, pushing the paranoia between them even further and causing a potential flashpoint. Again, seems kind of relevant. It's during the attack on one of the king's water convoys one day that we meet our protagonist, Beelzebub, who is a little video game loving imp, son of the king of the demons, called Lucifer in the English version, but we all know who this bad boy is. And if you're confused, he does look strangely familiar to someone in the Dragon Ball world because, you know, Deborah. Come on, it's Deborah, really. Now, although Beelzebub is not beyond stealing water from a king's lackeys, he does it mostly to provide demons with the precious liquids that they so desperately need, and is even willing to share it with humans living in poverty. So you could say it's like a cheeky little thief with a heart of gold or something like that. Yes, he's a demon, but he's nowhere near as bad as some demons can be. In his own words, he doesn't want them to die out or anything, so he and the other demons have someone to torment. So it's like the Vegeta Goku thing. Vegeta keeps Goku around because he needs someone to aim for, and no one gets to kill that brat other than me. But his peers are not at all convinced that this is the right way to go, and whether this is the actual reason behind his behavior. Again, kind of like Vegeta here. He's kind of stalling. He may like other people and not want them to die, so he uses his bad boy attitude to mask it, but I think people know. One day, the demons are approached by a man calling himself Sheriff Rao, who seems to be absolutely sick and tired of his king's greed and approaches the demons to try and mix things up, asking them for help in finding a mysterious spring or lake that could possibly help solve the water crisis and the people of Sandland as a whole, freeing themselves from the need of finding precious water from one limited source from their ruler's tyranny. He proves his intention by giving Beelzebub the only thing that survived the war. That is, of course, a PlayStation 6 and Dragon Quest XIII. Dragon Quest XIII? Well, they are developing Dragon Quest XII, so I think you better stock up some water, fellows. Yes, I don't want to alarm anyone, but this manga was drawn back in the year 2000, and currently we have a PlayStation 5 and Dragon Quest XI present. So again, Toriyama, I really hope you're not being an ominous prophet right now. But anyway, Beelzebub and Rao, together with a wise but cowardly old demon named Thief, you know, again, it's like a JRPG thing, so you don't really need to have a name, you just need a descriptor. They start their adventure to find the mysterious lake. We will not spoil any more because it is worth reading, but that's just the basic premise. And especially when you're a Dragon Ball fan and you remember that, again, it was released in the year 2000 and it's now coming to prominence. And you might actually start to see some things from Sandland seeping into Dragon Ball Super. And don't forget, Toriyama was kind of involved with developing characters for the Tournament of Power, so he might have had an influence on the Toei animators for Casserole here, likely to be a nod to the character above, General Zo. Or Zoo, or Zo. Unlike Dragon Ball though, Sandland's quite short. It's only one volume, so It's not going to be really, really long, and it's not going to be a slugfest, and it's much more self-contained, which will work perfectly for a shorter anime format, or even a movie. You could probably blast out the entire plot in one singular movie. Also, on an interesting note, this is another manga in which Toriyama could show his love for all things mechanical. Kind of like a Mad Max sort of thing. They all rely on these really rugged and really visceral vehicles, and that is really up Toriyama's alley. You could really tell he had a lot of fun for this. And it's particularly infamous for a certain tank, which has proven to be a source of annoyance for the author. As stated on a Sandland trade paperback, Toriyama does have his thoughts about this. This was supposed to be a short, simple manga about an old man and a tank, which I made for my own personal enjoyment. But the tank was harder to draw than I expected, and I stubbornly insisted on drawing it all myself, so I came to regret ever getting involved with it. But the story was already plotted out to the end, so I couldn't change anything, and I went through hell drawing the whole thing. That's so Toriyama, isn't it? He just kind of got bored with something, but this time he stuck it through. And while the author wasn't talking much about this particular project, he recently answered some questions in an interview for the official site of the entire Sandland project. And as always, all credit goes to Kanzenshi for the translations. Dragon Ball had ended, said Toriyama, and I had tried my hand at a few different short stories and one-shots, so I figured I'd draw a work that poured everything of who I was at the time into it, which I intended to be one last hurrah. Thinking back on it now, even with it being limited to a single volume's worth of material, it was quite a feat to have drawn all of that myself, without an assistant in a weekly series. I'm amazed at it myself. Wow. So Toriyama was actually intending Sandland to be his magnum opus, his final series and story after Dragon Ball? I mean, to be fair, kind of makes sense in a way, because you've done Dr. Slump, you've done Dragon Ball, you didn't really need to do much more because Toriyama had made his mark on manga and anime as a whole, but he felt like just capturing its essence one more time into something he likes. Something about a very simple story, loads and loads of mechanical gubbins, which he really has a passion for, and of course, you know, complaining about it. Toriyama does like to complain, but he still gets things done. But don't we all like to complain sometimes, to be fair? If Sandland had been his final piece of work, I think he would have actually gone off on a really good note. And I think Sandland would have been lauded much more than it actually is. Loads of people, when the Sandland reveal was announced last year, people really downed on it. You really shouldn't. Again, it's such a good story. And if you are a fan of Mad Max, as well as dystopian worlds where there's one limited source and you have to try and get it and bring it to the public, even if you like Robin Hood, you'd like this. But Toriyama continues. When I draw comics myself, the contents tend to be rather plain, lightweight fluff, which doesn't lend itself to finding an audience. The truth is that even here I held back on the fluff and worked hard to make it a proper, serious story. Reasonably speaking, my favourite comic should be my most recent one. Thinking back on it now though, I do feel that, at least in terms of the quality of the art and the material and the vitality of it, the stuff I was drawing around the time of Sandland was incredible. You can definitely tell from Sandland's contents that Toriyama's really considering this to be a passion project. Again, if he had ended his entire career on Sandland, this would have been a really, really interesting way to end it. Known for being quite a juvenile mangaka and manga artist, this would have actually been quite serious and mature and quite impressive to actually conclude on this, but it would have been something that would have encapsulated the Toriyama spirit. You still get some very cheeky jokes in there, but it's not the main core of it. Anyway, more. Are there any unique charms or characteristics of this work that only you yourself would know, Toriyama-sensei? For Sandland, I scanned the inked paper manuscript into my computer. Then using software, I did the blacking and applied tone I made myself to finish it up. I think I probably got almost no sleep. After I'd finished drawing the whole thing, I lost the wooden pen holder I had been using ever since before my professional debut. That pen holder was one I had whittled down here and there with a knife and sandpaper, and which had worn in perfectly to the shape of my hand, through years of use. I bought a new one and tried whittling it down here and there as before, but it just didn't feel quite right. Since then, I've been using it as an excuse for why I'd hardly ever draw comics anymore. Note, by the way, there's been a lot of confusion about it, including myself getting confused. This does not mean he used this as an excuse to stop making manga altogether, as some publications and myself misunderstood. He just had to substitute his pen for a while before he found his old one again. I mean, yeah, so if there is any confusion and ambiguity, this is just a kind of banter. Certainly that might be the case. I feel that I really ought to have given more thought to the readers, but instead, I let my own preferences take center stage. Maybe I'm not cut out to be a professional. This to me is actually quite true, because many times Toriyama has gone on record to say that he doesn't really care what the fans say. If he wants to do something, he will do it. And that is actually quite strong-willed for an author. Usually authors like to placate to their fandom and give them what they want. Many times, Toriyama has actually gone the opposite way. If the fandom of his likes a particular character, he may go above and beyond to either write them out of the story or make sure bad things happen to him. It's quite the subversive way that Toriyama has become famous or infamous for. That you really got to be careful with Toriyama. You don't want to say that you like something because he may go the other way. To me, anyone who tells me that this is fun is truly a god tier fan who really gets me. I suppose is how I feel. Aw, that's kind of neat. I suppose really Toriyama had just accepted that not many of the fans would know about Sandland after 23 years, nearly a quarter of a century, and it hadn't really gotten much love. Of course, there was initially a little bit of hype because it was a brand new Toriyama work, but it kind of faded away into obscurity and it never really got much traction in the West. Loads of die-hard Toriyama fans knew about it, I myself and have knew about it, but not many people cared for it because it wasn't Dragon Ball. Now it's getting the attention that it really deserves, in the form of an animated movie. And the fact that they cut their teeth as superhero, and now they're trying out with Sandland, it actually seems to kind of work because there's not that much absolute rambunctious action and really fast-paced material like you see in Superhero. It's kind of more down to earth and more laid back, and it's a simple adventure. I think this medium of a CGI world actually kind of works in that way. Not to mention that nowadays with particle physics and stuff, sand actually looks kind of good. And not to mention it'll be a lot simpler to animate. But I like the fact that Toriyama's pleased and that, you know, people care about the stuff that's lesser known. The video I saw still had a lot of unfinished bits, but even then I could see well enough that the quality was extraordinarily high. I never dared to think it would ever be animated, so for it to have this kind of quality, it's already a dream come true. So yeah, this gives us some insight not only into Sandland itself, but also into Toriyama's creative process, and not to mention the fact that he's really buzzed about this because it's something, admittedly, not Dragon Ball. And I'm sure he's mentioned the pen story on some other occasions as well, but it's now come to light again and again. There is no ambiguity here. He just lost it for a bit. This doesn't mean he stopped manga because of it. But we wanted to introduce you to that series anyway, Sandland, because we feel that it would be a real shame for many of you to know the author for only Dragon Ball and maybe Dr. Slump. He has done so much more. I mean, don't forget, there is the Manga Theatre book, the compilation of some of his other short stories you really should give a look to. And yeah, you really should give Sandland a go in particular. While there are a lot of design references in later Dragon Ball material, look, I mean, Pell of Universe 2 here, who could be Thief's more serious brother, there are no direct links to Dragon Ball, so it's not trying to sup off the teat of it, like with Jarko or Dr. Slump. But, you know, I've actually seen a fun fan theory circulating around the internet about this. For the record, we don't think it's true in particular, but it's pretty fun to think about though. Regarding the placement of Sandland in the Dragon world. Again, may I remind you, they are not directly linked. This theory proposes that Sandland's Earth is the Earth of Universe 6, as both were ravaged in a senseless war. Now, of course, we're no experts, but we think that Universe 6's Earth has been far more ravaged than the one we see in Sandland. In the Sandland universe, people can live there still. According to the Universe 6 Earth, there's nothing left. It's been completely scorched. It's just a husk. Also, it would be possible that this is set even further in the future, but that would make the fate of Beelzebub and his friends a pretty bleak one, the fact that that's their future. Yeah, it's a good thing that Beerus did all of that, eh? Anyway, all jokes aside, we don't think that any of these theories are real, but it is a cute way to utilise in some crossover fanfiction maybe. We hope that you've enjoyed our departure from Dragon Ball, and that we have encouraged at least some of you to check out Sandland for yourself before the movie comes out. Is it worth it? Trust us, it is.